a gun aimed straight at my daughter's face. The moment I heard someone yell, "Freeze!" my entire body turned to ice. The man holding the weapon wasn't a criminal, not a burglar breaking into our home. It was our very own HOA security guard. The reason? My daughter supposedly looked suspicious coming home, late at 10 p.m. What he didn't know, what would soon cost him dearly, was that my daughter is an FBI tactical commander who has led some of the most dangerous raids in the country over the past 5 years. And that night was only the beginning of a disaster that would expose the rot beneath our picture-perfect neighborhood. Before I dive in, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. And stay with me as I tell you how one arrogant HOA guard destroyed his career when he picked the wrong family to intimidate. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm 58, a retired diplomatic officer who spent 3 decades dealing with foreign governments, corruption, and crisis. I thought I'd seen every shade of arrogance the world had to offer. Then I moved to Lakeside Pines, a high-end, gated community in Connecticut that promised luxury living with world-class security. What the glossy brochure didn't mention was that security meant living under a local dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. 5 years ago, I lost my wife. After years of assignments abroad, I wanted peace, maybe even a sense of home again. Lakeside Pines had pristine lawns, shimmering lakes, and quiet, winding streets. It felt safe. It felt like the right place to start over. But that illusion shattered the moment I realized the community was run like a corporate fiefdom. The HOA's self-proclaimed ruler was Robert Thompson, a 58-year-old ex-executive with a superiority complex and a wife, Sarah, who treated gossip like currency. Every week brought a new violation notice. Grass too long, blinds the wrong shade, mailbox too tall. But none of that compared to the real enforcer, Curtis Wilson. Curtis was a 42-year-old ex-cop with a history. He'd been discharged from the police force after multiple excessive force complaints. Now he strutted around our neighborhood like a wannabe sheriff, backed by 4 other guards who clearly took his lead. Together, they acted like they were running a military base, not a gated suburb. The night everything started. It was a Friday in July. Amy, my daughter, had just returned home from a 2-year counterterrorism assignment overseas. Her flight got delayed, so she didn't reach the gate until about 10 p.m. I'd given her the entry code and her own key, but in my excitement, I forgot to alert security about her arrival. I was sitting in the living room, waiting, when I heard raised voices outside. I stepped onto the porch and froze. Curtis Wilson stood there, his gun drawn, pointed squarely at my daughter's face. His partner Jason hovered behind him, hand resting on his holster. "I don't care what ID you're flashing," Curtis barked. "You don't have resident clearance. Get on the ground, now!" Amy didn't flinch. Under the porch light, her expression was steady, her hands visible. Years of real combat had taught her how to handle this kind of threat, though usually the threat was more professional than a power-hungry HOA guard with a gun. "Curtis!" I shouted, rushing forward. "That's my daughter!" I tried to step between them, but Amy subtly moved to keep me out of the line of fire. She was calm, composed, assessing. She'd already noted his weapon, a Glock 19, and likely knew it wasn't properly licensed for private use. Curtis didn't lower his weapon right away. He was enjoying the authority too much. "Your daughter should have checked in with security," he sneered. "We have rules, Mr. Johnson, no exceptions. Even for FBI agents, if that's even true." Amy's voice was cool and precise when she finally spoke. "Mr. Wilson, pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is a felony. And I have reason to believe you're not licensed to carry that weapon under Connecticut law." Curtis's bravado cracked for just a second. His jaw tightened, but he holstered the gun. "This is private property," he muttered weakly. "Different rules apply." "Not the ones you think," Amy replied calmly. He turned away, muttering something about reporting us to the HOA board. I could see Jason's nervous glance. He knew they'd gone too far. Inside, my hands trembled with fury. Amy placed a hand on my shoulder. "He's dangerous," she said quietly. "Not because he's capable, because he's insecure and armed. That's the worst combination. That night, over tea that went cold, she began asking questions about the HOA, about Curtis, about the Thompsons. Her mind was already working through patterns, analyzing the power structure of our seemingly peaceful neighborhood. Sometimes the real corruption isn't in big cities or governments, she said. It's hiding in communities like this, where people abuse tiny positions of authority. I didn't know then just how right she was. The next morning, there was a sharp knock on the door. Robert Thompson himself stood there wearing a smug smile and a Lakeside Pines polo, his wife Sarah at his side. He held an envelope like it was a royal decree. "Mr. Johnson," he began in a syrupy tone, "we need to address last night's unfortunate misunderstanding." "Unfortunate?" I snapped. "Your guard pointed a loaded gun at my daughter's head." Robert's expression didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "Our security personnel followed standard protocol. If you had properly registered your—" "She's my daughter," I interrupted. "She wasn't trespassing. She was coming home." Amy appeared beside me, calm as ever. "Mr. Thompson," she said politely, "do all your security officers hold valid armed licenses in this state? I noticed some irregularities last night." His smile faltered. "Our staff meet all HOA standards," he replied curtly, extending the warning notice toward me. Amy didn't take it. "We won't be accepting that," she said softly. "But thank you for stopping by." She closed the door, gently, but firmly. Through the window, I saw Sarah gesturing animatedly as they walked away, no doubt preparing her next round of neighborhood gossip. I looked at Amy. "That was satisfying," I admitted. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's necessary to set boundaries before negotiations begin. And make no mistake, Dad, we're in negotiations now." Later that afternoon, we met Linda Peterson, a kind, sharp-witted woman in her 60s who lived 3 houses down. She brought over a belated welcome pie and over coffee revealed what many residents had whispered for years. "Robert and Sarah run this place like their personal kingdom," she said. "If you question them, they drown you in fines or blacklist you from community events. People just give up." Amy listened quietly, asking gentle but precise questions, extracting details without making Linda uncomfortable. Within days, Amy had copies of the HOA bylaws spread across our kitchen table, highlighting clauses that wouldn't hold up under state law. Meanwhile, Curtis began parking his patrol SUV across from our driveway, engine running, headlights aimed at our house. A petty intimidation move, but Amy had faced cartel leaders and hostage takers. One ex-cop on a power trip wasn't going to rattle her. I started noticing neighbors avoiding us, whispering behind curtains. Sarah hosted a ladies' tea that weekend, everyone invited but us. Amy didn't seem bothered. She was too busy digging into the HOA's finances. When I asked what she'd found, she turned her laptop toward me. "Curtis Wilson," she said, "was fired from the police department for multiple force complaints. Guess who personally vouched to have him hired here? Robert Thompson, I guessed." She nodded. "And look at this. The HOA's contracted security firm pays Curtis nearly double the standard rate. That means either Robert's embezzling from HOA fees or someone's laundering money through fake invoices." She leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Dad, this isn't about overzealous rules. Something much bigger is hiding behind that HOA sign." And that was the moment I realized the nightmare wasn't just about power trips or petty fines. My daughter had stumbled onto a full-scale fraud operation buried in plain sight, right under the nose of our perfect, peaceful neighborhood. Tensions in Lakeside Pines hit a breaking point the day Amy ran into Sarah Thompson at the neighborhood grocery store. I wasn't there, but when Amy told me what happened, I could picture the scene perfectly, the calm before the storm. According to Amy, Sarah had accidentally rammed her shopping cart into hers and then feigned surprise. "Oh, look who it is, the FBI agent," Sarah said, loud enough for everyone within 3 aisles to hear. "I do hope you're not investigating our grocery store. We're all good citizens here, well, except for those who don't follow the rules." Amy didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she gave a cool smile and said evenly, "Actually, financial crimes are my specialty. It's always fascinating to see what people think they can hide in plain sight." Sarah's smirk faltered, her face paling as she muttered something and quickly wheeled away. But not before another shopper, a woman in a tailored pantsuit, took notice. That woman turned out to be Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney who happened to sit on the HOA board. Unlike Robert and Sarah, she had a conscience and a growing unease about what was really happening in Lakeside Pines. Jessica approached Amy in the parking lot, introduced herself, and quietly said, "I've been looking for someone who understands how to uncover the truth. There are things about this place that don't add up. Shady contracts, missing funds, selective rule enforcement. We've been trying to gather proof, but we need someone who knows what to do with it." When Amy relayed the conversation to me later that night, her eyes held a spark I hadn't seen in years, that same calculating gleam she'd had as a child when faced with a tough puzzle. "Sometimes, Dad," she said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "you have to let people think they're in control before you flip the board over." The opportunity to flip the board came sooner than expected. A week later, the annual HOA meeting was scheduled, the grand stage for Robert Thompson's little empire to show off its supposed accomplishments. The community center had been arranged like a miniature courtroom. Robert and Sarah sat elevated at the front with Curtis Wilson, their self-appointed muscle, standing off to the side. Next to Robert sat David Clark, the HOA's treasurer, an accountant who nodded at everything his boss said like a bobblehead on a dashboard. Amy and I were assigned seats at the very back, a deliberate move to keep us out of sight. What Robert didn't realize was that it gave Amy the perfect vantage point to observe everyone, noting every whisper, every nervous glance. Over the past few days, she'd quietly built alliances with several residents, including Jessica, who were tired of the Thompson regime's control. She'd also reconnected with James Rodriguez, an old friend from the FBI Academy who now worked for the local police department. The meeting began with predictable smugness. Robert gave a glowing speech about community harmony and rising property values. Sarah followed with updates on upcoming social events, all of which, unsurprisingly, excluded us. Then came David's so-called financial report, a vague overview full of round numbers and zero transparency. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand. My years of reviewing government budgets had trained me to spot nonsense when I saw it. "I noticed," I began, "that our security expenses have increased by nearly 30% this year, but there's no breakdown of those costs. Could you provide some details?" The room went dead silent. Clearly nobody ever dared ask real questions. Robert's smile stiffened. "Security is a top priority here, Mr. Johnson. The board has approved all expenditures." "I understand," I said evenly. "But as homeowners paying those fees, surely we're entitled to know what exactly we're paying for." David fidgeted with his papers, avoiding my eyes. Robert's jaw tightened. "Detailed financials are restricted to board members only, for security reasons," he said sharply. "Now, if there are no other—" He stopped mid-sentence when Jessica spoke up. "Actually, I am on the board," she said calmly. "And I haven't seen those itemized security expenses either." The room buzzed with murmurs. Robert's smile vanished, replaced with a glare that could have cut glass. Curtis shifted his stance, stepping closer to me, a silent intimidation tactic. Within minutes, Robert rushed through the rest of the agenda and abruptly declared the meeting adjourned. As people began to leave, Sarah cornered Jessica by the refreshments table, their hushed voices rising into a heated argument. Meanwhile, Curtis and another guard stood near the exit, blocking our way with thinly veiled hostility. "Let them act first," Amy murmured beside me. "The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they'll make." Sure enough, as we tried to drive out of the parking lot, a security SUV swerved in front of us, blocking our path. Curtis approached my window, his smug grin firmly in place. "Sir," he said, tapping his flashlight against the glass, "your vehicle is in violation of HOA parking guidelines. You're angled more than 15 degrees from the curb." The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but Amy, calm as always, rested a hand on my arm. "Officer Wilson," she said through the open window, her tone clipped and professional, "you're obstructing a vehicle's exit. That's a traffic violation. Without breaking eye contact, she pulled out her phone and dialed. Officer Rodriguez? It's Amy Johnson. I'm at the Lakeside Pines Community Center. HOA security is blocking our car and making false claims. Could you send a unit over? The color drained from Curtis's face instantly. He stepped back, motioning for his partner to move the SUV. Just a misunderstanding, he muttered. As we drove away, I caught sight of Robert and Sarah standing on the steps, watching us. Their confident smirks were gone, replaced with something new, uncertainty. Well, I said, glancing at Amy, that probably didn't make us any new friends. We don't need friends. Dad, she replied coolly, we just need respect. And sometimes, that means reminding people where the real authority lies. Back home, Amy spread a stack of documents across the kitchen table, HOA financials she and Jessica had been quietly reviewing. Curtis isn't the root problem, she said. He's just a symptom. What do you mean? I asked. She pointed to several entries in the records. The company that supposedly employs Curtis, Secure Shield Services, is registered to Robert's brother-in-law. They've been billing the HOA double standard rates for years. And look here. She slid another page toward me. There's over $300,000 unaccounted for. Funds marked for infrastructure improvements that never actually happened. I scanned the documents, my old diplomatic instincts kicking in. This looks like a textbook embezzlement ring, I said. But why risk it? Robert already lives comfortably, Amy gave a humorless smile. It's not about money, Dad, it's about ego. People like Robert and Sarah don't break rules because they need to. They do it because they believe they can. Then she flipped to another file. Property records. Robert owns 3 homes in this community through shell companies. None of them ever receive violations, even when they're clearly breaking HOA codes. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Robert pushing new bylaw changes. We need to talk. Amy showed me the text, her expression hardening. They're moving fast, which means we have to move faster. She picked up her phone again and called someone else. Marcus, it's Amy. I need your expertise. Financial analysis, urgent case. Civilian matter, but time-sensitive. Can you fly to Connecticut tomorrow? Perfect. When she hung up, she explained. Special Agent Marcus Reed, one of the Bureau's top financial crime analysts. He owes me a favor. With his help, we can confirm everything and make it airtight. I frowned. Amy, this is a neighborhood dispute, not a federal case. She looked at me steadily. Dad, when people in power steal from their own community and abuse authority, it is a federal crime. And besides, she smirked faintly, no one points a gun at me and walks away clean. The Thompsons retaliated the very next morning. We woke up to 5 new HOA violation notices taped to our door. Our trash can was misaligned by 2 inches. The porch light was too warm in tone. The American flag wasn't properly illuminated. The hedges exceeded acceptable symmetry. And my car's tires had allegedly touched the grass, each. Notice carried a fine, small but symbolic. The message was clear. They wanted us to back down, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Curtis and his security goons began parking outside our home for hours, snapping photos of supposed violations. One afternoon, when I tried to swim laps at the community pool, the attendant politely informed me that my membership privileges had been temporarily suspended pending review. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street to avoid even casual greetings. Clearly, the Thompsons had begun their whisper campaign. Through it all, Amy stayed calm, even amused. Textbook intimidation, she remarked as she sifted through another stack of violation letters. They're trying to exhaust us into compliance. Unfortunately for them, that never works on professionals. Instead of feeling fear, I found my resolve hardening. After decades in diplomacy, dealing with warlords and corrupt ministers, Robert Thompson's suburban dictatorship felt laughably unskilled. When Marcus Reed, Amy's old bureau colleague, arrived that week, his presence brought a quiet, methodical intensity. A serious man in his early 40s, With a sharp suit and an investigator's posture, Marcus spent 2 long days analyzing Jessica's copies of HOA financials. Occasionally, he'd shake his head or whistle under his breath. "If these figures are legitimate," he told us, "you're looking at a clear pattern of embezzlement and fraud. The security contract alone is an obvious conflict of interest. Someone's been siphoning money." While Marcus examined documents, Amy was busy upgrading our defenses. She installed discreet high-grade surveillance cameras around the house, not the kind visible from the curb, but miniature, concealed ones that fed directly to her laptop. "Documentation is everything," she explained when I raised an eyebrow. "They want to play dirty? Fine. We'll keep the record clean." Her caution proved wise. 3 nights later, the cameras captured footage of Curtis and 2 guards trespassing at 3 a.m., shining flashlights across our lawn, measuring grass height, and taking photos. It was surreal and illegal. Things came to a head when Linda Peterson showed up at our doorstep in tears. "Sarah told me if I keep talking to you, my grandkids won't be allowed at the playground," she sobbed. "She said it's for their safety." Amy wrapped an arm around her, gentle but firm. "Linda, you don't owe us an apology. People like Sarah use fear as leverage, but that power fades the moment you stop believing it." That night, the glow from across the street caught our attention. Through partially drawn curtains, we saw David Clark enter the Thompson residence carrying a folder bulging with papers. Curtis arrived soon after. The 3 argued animatedly, pointing toward the window before drawing the blinds. "They're scrambling," Amy said, watching from our darkened living room. Jessica's questions exposed more than they expected. "They're trying to clean the trail." She tapped out a few texts. "It's time to advance the operation." The next morning, Curtis appeared at our door with 2 guards, radiating smug authority. "Mandatory security inspection," he announced, attempting to push past me. I stepped into the doorway, blocking his path. "You're not entering my home without consent or a warrant," I said evenly. Curtis brandished a paper like a trophy. "Section 12, paragraph 3, inspections allowed upon reasonable suspicion. We've logged 27 violations this week." Amy appeared beside me, phone in hand, camera rolling. "That clause violates state property law," she said coolly. "Also, we have footage of you on our lawn at 3 a.m. Would you like to discuss that?" Curtis's confidence faltered. "You're interfering with HOA procedures," he snapped, retreating under the gaze of his uneasy subordinates. Later that night, our cameras caught something worse. Curtis and another guard sneaking into our yard, vandalizing the garden, uprooting flowers, and spray-painting crude insults on the fence. I was furious, ready to confront them at dawn, but Amy stopped me with a calm hand. "Let them dig deeper," she said. "Every act like this only strengthens our case." She made a brief, deliberate call. "It's time," was all she said. "We need reinforcement." By sunrise, the community began to shift. Jessica Miller arrived first, carrying gardening tools. Within an hour, 6 neighbors joined her, helping us restore the damaged flower beds. What began as quiet sympathy soon turned into open defiance. Residents shared their own stories: fines for nonsense rules, late fees for bills they'd already paid, and whispered warnings from Sarah about problem residents. Unity bloomed among the broken plants. Marcus worked beside us in jeans and a baseball cap, simply Amy's friend from work. His presence proved timely when Curtis drove past slowly, snapping photos of the volunteers. "That the guy?" Marcus murmured. Amy nodded. "Armed?" "Probably." Marcus stepped aside to make a call. 20 minutes later, Officer James Rodriguez pulled up in his cruiser, coincidentally checking on community safety. Curtis's SUV sped off almost immediately. Inside, James briefed us privately. "You were right, Amy. Curtis's background is a mess. Multiple excessive force reports, questionable shootings, and 1 domestic complaint that vanished from record. He was forced out quietly." He paused grimly. "Also, his carry permit expired a year ago. No renewal. Psychological flag." Meanwhile, Amy's dining table had transformed into a war room. Jessica brought copies of the HOA's ledgers. Marcus mapped money flows through shell companies linked to Robert and Sarah. James compiled reports proving Curtis's misuse of authority. tickets issued to critics. Selective enforcement, fake security charges. Look here, Marcus said, pointing to a diagram of company connections. This firm supposedly employs Curtis's team. It's registered to Sarah's brother, based at a fake office, and their tax filings don't match. They're paid $150,000 a year, but only report $60,000 in wages. The rest vanishes offshore. Jessica added. That's just the start. Landscaping, road work, event planning, all inflated contracts tied to Robert's friends. Classic laundering pattern. That evening, as volunteers left and the last flower was replanted, Linda lingered behind. Amy, she said softly, they can't actually ban my grandkids, can they? No, Amy replied, smiling. Their power depends on people believing in it. Once that illusion breaks, they have nothing left. Linda nodded. Then it's broken. The next morning, the unexpected happened. Robert and Sarah Thompson showed up at our door. Their smiles were brittle, rehearsed. Michael, Robert began, things have escalated. We'd like to put this unpleasantness behind us. He extended a folder labeled Mutual Non-Disclosure and Non-Litigation Agreement. Sarah chimed in. We're all neighbors. No need for conflict. I invited them in, maintaining my diplomat's courtesy, though Sarah's eyes darted around the room as if hunting for rule violations. Amy flipped through the document, her expression unreadable. So, she said finally, if we agree not to question HOA finances, you'll stop harassing us? She set the papers down. Interesting offer. What prompted the sudden civility? Robert fidgeted. The community works best when residents cooperate. You mean obey, I muttered. Amy shot me a warning glance before continuing sweetly. Harmony requires fairness, not silence. I'm afraid we'll decline. Robert's facade cracked. You're making a mistake. There will be consequences. Amy's voice turned cool. Just so you know, this conversation is being recorded. Threats against homeowners can be considered harassment. Their smiles evaporated as they turned to leave. When the door closed, I looked at her with admiration. So what's next? Amy's eyes gleamed. We go public. Press, legal action, full exposure. And Dad, you'll lead the statement. You've got the authority they can't fake. By the following week, Robert had called an emergency HOA meeting, desperate to regain control. The community hall was packed, every seat filled, tension hanging heavy in the air. At the front table, Robert sat flanked by Sarah, David, and a visibly nervous Curtis. Their confidence was fading, and Amy knew it. They had every reason to be uneasy. Amy's plan had been orchestrated with the precision of a covert operation. She ensured that Officer James Rodriguez, Agent Marcus Reed, and even a journalist from the local paper were seated strategically throughout the hall before the meeting began. When Robert Thompson called the gathering to order, his usual commanding tone carried a faint tremor. Before we discuss the proposed amendments, he began, I want to remind everyone that Lakeside Pines thrives because of its high standards. Unfortunately, a few residents have chosen division over unity. His eyes found mine, sharp and accusatory. I returned his stare with a polite, diplomatic smile, the same expression that had once disarmed ambassadors and generals alike. When Robert finally moved to the First Amendment, one granting his security team unrestricted access to all private properties. I rose to my feet. Point of order, I said evenly. Before we vote on expanding the board's authority, residents deserve to understand how that authority has already been used. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. I stepped forward carrying a neatly organized folder. As a homeowner concerned with transparency, I've been reviewing financial records that, by law, should be available to every member. But oddly enough, they've been deliberately obscured. Robert tried to interject, but Jessica Miller swiftly invoked HOA procedure to support my right to speak. His attempt to silence me failed. For the next half hour, I laid out the evidence Amy, Jessica, Marcus, and James had gathered, piece by piece, calm and deliberate. The security firm receiving $150,000 a year of our HOA funds, I said, is owned by Sarah Thompson's brother. It employs guards without proper licenses, including Mr. Curtis Wilson, who has threatened residents while carrying an unregistered firearm. Curtis shifted uneasily as dozens of eyes turned his way. I continued, my voice steady. The landscaping contract was awarded to Robert's former college roommate at inflated rates, with minimal work performed. As I spoke, Jessica moved through the crowd, handing out neatly stapled packets, copies of the financial records, emails, and photographs. Murmurs grew louder. Robert's face darkened. Sarah whispered furiously to David Clark, whose complexion had turned pale as chalk. "And finally," I said, letting my words hang in the air, "over $300,000 marked for infrastructure improvements has vanished without a trace. No invoices, no receipts, no projects." I looked up. "Before we expand the board's powers, shouldn't we know where our current funds have gone?" Curtis started toward me, his posture menacing. Officer Rodriguez intercepted him effortlessly, murmuring something low and firm that froze him in place. Robert, visibly unraveling, slammed a hand on the table. "These are outrageous lies," he shouted. "This meeting is adjourned." But instead of dispersing, residents began standing, voices rising in protest. "We have a right to answers," someone shouted. "Show us the books." I gestured toward the documents. "The numbers speak for themselves," I said calmly. "If there's an honest explanation, we'd all be glad to hear it." Then came the breaking point. David Clark, shaking and drenched in sweat, stammered, I just filed the forms Robert gave me. I didn't know about the shell companies," Sarah gasped. Robert spun toward him in panic, trying to drag him from the microphone. The room erupted in shock. The reporter scribbled furiously, while Marcus quietly positioned himself by the exit, anticipating what might follow. Cornered, Robert tried a new tactic. "This is a smear campaign," he spat. "Mr. Johnson has a personal grudge because his daughter was questioned by security for suspicious behavior." Amy, who had stayed silent until then, finally stepped forward. Her tone was calm, her gaze sharp. "If you mean this kind of questioning," she said, connecting her phone to the projector, "then the residents deserve to see it." The screen flickered to life, showing Curtis Wilson pointing his weapon directly at her during their first confrontation. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Then came the second clip. Curtis and his guards vandalizing our garden in the dead of night. The reaction was instantaneous. Sarah's face went white. Gasps and shouts filled the room. Curtis, humiliated and trembling with rage, snapped. With a roar, he lunged toward me, hand reaching for his concealed firearm. Screams erupted. But before he could draw, Amy moved. Her reaction was swift and precise, a blur of motion that ended with Curtis pinned to the floor. Face down, his wrist twisted into his own handcuffs, Amy's knee pressing between his shoulders. Officer Rodriguez moved in seamlessly, reading Curtis his rights. "You're under arrest for assault, brandishing an illegal weapon, and criminal threats." Curtis cursed, but the authority in Rodriguez's voice silenced him. Robert bolted for the door, but Marcus intercepted him, flashing his badge. "Robert Thompson," he said calmly. "Special Agent Marcus Reed, FBI. I'd like to discuss the offshore transfers linked to the HOA accounts." The room fell into stunned silence as Robert froze mid-step. Within seconds, 2 uniformed officers appeared at the entrance, summoned earlier by Rodriguez. Robert's face collapsed into disbelief as he was escorted out beside the still snarling Curtis. For a moment, the entire hall was silent. Then voices broke out in a chorus of disbelief and anger. Jessica, composed and commanding, quickly restored order. "Everyone, please remain calm. We'll appoint an interim committee immediately and begin full audits of the association's finances." Within minutes, she had formed a provisional board from trusted residents. Sarah Thompson, her face streaked with tears, fled the room without a word. David, trembling but seemingly relieved, turned over every document in his possession to Officer Rodriguez, mumbling about cooperation and plea deals. When the crowd dispersed, Amy and I stepped into the warm evening air, the sound of crickets replacing the earlier chaos. For the first time in months, the weight that had hung over Lakeside Pines seemed to lift. Was all of this really necessary? I asked quietly as we walked home. Couldn't we have just reported Curtis that first night? Amy smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the amber streetlight. "We could have," she said. "But that would have treated a symptom, not the disease. Curtis was just the muscle. The real problem was power being abused systemically, and people too afraid to fight back. I nodded slowly. You dismantled it completely. She glanced at me with a small, knowing smile. It's what I'm trained to do, Dad. Look at the full picture. Before we reached the porch, the same reporter who had witnessed everything hurried up, recorder in hand. Miss Johnson, she called. Who are you exactly? Amy gave her that quiet, measured smile. Just a homeowner who knows her rights, she replied, then guided me inside. 3 months later, Lakeside Pines was almost unrecognizable, gardens restored, rules rewritten, and for the first time in years, a neighborhood living without fear. The criminal investigation unfolded with meticulous precision, exposing every layer of corruption that had infected Lakeside Pines. Within weeks, Robert Thompson faced a barrage of charges, embezzlement, fraud, and large-scale financial misconduct. Curtis, meanwhile, was prosecuted separately for weapons violations, assault, property destruction, and harassment. What began as a small-town scandal soon exploded into regional headlines as local journalists' coverage was picked up by major media outlets. The once secretive world of HOA politics was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, forcing long-overdue transparency. Sarah Thompson's glamorous facade crumbled under the pressure. Overwhelmed by mounting legal fees and public humiliation, she sold their home quietly and left town to stay with her sister, leaving behind a legacy of vanity and deceit. David Clark, the treasurer who had turned a blind eye for too long, decided to cooperate with authorities. His testimony laid out the entire scheme, how Robert had siphoned off HOA funds through shell companies, inflated contracts, and kickback deals masked as community initiatives. The corrupt security firm was dissolved and replaced by a properly licensed company whose guards knew their actual role, to protect, not intimidate. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't administrative, it was human. The residents of Lakeside Pines, long divided by fear and favoritism, began to rediscover what it meant to live in a community. Jessica Miller was elected as the new HOA president, with Linda Peterson as her vice president. Their first reforms rewrote the bylaws for transparency, limited board power, and slashed unnecessary fees. Neighborhood gatherings returned, this time filled with laughter rather than tension. The invisible walls between neighbors began to fall. One warm evening, as Amy and I sat on the porch watching the sunset before her next overseas assignment, an unexpected figure appeared at our gate, Sarah Thompson. Gone were the designer heels and the perfect blowout. She looked smaller somehow, weighed down by humility. "May I talk to you?" she asked, voice unsteady. Amy nodded, inviting her in. Sarah refused to sit, as though she didn't feel worthy of comfort. "I wanted to apologize before I leave for good," she began softly. I knew parts of what Robert was doing, maybe not everything, but enough. And I stayed silent because it benefited me. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone. That's how it starts, isn't it? Amy listened quietly, her expression calm but unreadable. "You must have known it would end this way," she said gently. Sarah's voice broke. "I did. But I was addicted to the image, the attention, the respect. I thought being Mrs. Thompson made me someone important. Now I'm 55 and starting over with nothing but regrets." As she left, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and understanding. Power corrupts, but often what drives it isn't greed. It's the fear of being ordinary. That night, Amy and I decided to host a neighborhood barbecue, a symbolic celebration of new beginnings. People came with smiles, dishes, and stories. The air was light, unburdened by suspicion. Jessica approached me as Amy chatted with a few residents nearby. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said quietly. She never demanded control, yet somehow she changed everything. "We'll miss her leadership here." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. "That's Amy," I said. "She fixes things without needing credit for it." Later, when the crowd had gone and the porch lights glowed softly across the lawns, Amy and I sat side by side on the steps, bourbon glasses in hand. The night was calm, the chaos of the past months fading into memory. "You could have ended it the night Curtis pulled that gun," I said. "Instead, you dismantled an entire corrupt system. Why?" Amy thought for a moment, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "Because real change isn't about taking down a bad guy. she said quietly. It's about rebuilding what was broken. Curtis was just a symptom, Dad. The disease was fear and control. I wanted to show people they didn't have to accept that. She glanced toward the neighborhood where soft porch lights glimmered like stars. You taught me that diplomacy isn't avoiding conflict, it's transforming it. I just used your lessons in a different arena. As dawn approached and I prepared to drive her to the airport, we found a stack of thank you notes from neighbors. Some simply said thank you. Others included heartfelt words about how the community finally felt like home again. As we loaded her bags into the trunk, Amy smiled. You'll be okay here without me? She teased. What if another rent-a-cop decides to play tough guy? I chuckled. Don't worry about me. I've still got a few diplomatic tricks left. As we drove through the quiet streets, the rising sun bathed the houses in gold. You know, Amy said after a pause, I've learned something over the years in command. You don't always need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you win by knowing how the game is played and rewriting the rules. I smiled as the terminal came into view. That sounds like something your old man might have said. Maybe, she said with a grin. But I just gave it better delivery. The car grew quiet as we reached the drop-off zone. Amy turned to me, her face glowing with the first light of day. Sometimes, she said, the most peaceful places are the ones that survive the hardest storms. Months later, the story of the Lakeside Pines rebellion, of a daughter who exposed corruption and a father who guided her with patience and wit, became something of a legend. Whenever an HOA anywhere tried to overreach, someone would mention the commander's daughter and her diplomat father. Not all heroes wear uniforms or capes. Some simply understand their rights, stand their ground, and refuse to be intimidated. And as the people of Lakeside Pines learned, sometimes the greatest victories aren't won by force, but by courage, truth, and the quiet conviction to do what's right. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe karma should come with legal paperwork.